Welcome to another episode of The Marketer's Edge, a series designed to share senior level marketing perspective about marketer challenges, opportunities, and agency relationships. Our goal is to help marketers learn from other marketers across different industries and to help provide perspective for agencies about the things that marketers deal with every day to help them better represent their clients and win new business. Today, we're talking with Adam Weinroth, the head of software marketing for Colossal Biosciences, located in Austin, Texas. Adam, thanks so much for joining us today. How have you been?
You're very welcome. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you. Everything's going great. It's a little dreary here, but
In Austin, is it?
uh,
I'm sorry to hear that.
so
It's
can't complain.
No, it's a great town for sure. So, hey, I've got a small handful of questions for you, but I thought before we do that, can you tell me a little bit about your background? You've spent a lot of your career working with startups and technology firms, which I know will be of interest to our viewers. Can you tell me a little bit about your experiences?
Sure. So the roots of my marketing experience, I majored in marketing in undergrad, and then didn't really do a lot with it the first few years of my career. I got really into this thing that was happening called the internet, and went more towards the technical side and product development. But then I found myself moving back towards marketing, and so the start of my marketing career really has to do with product marketing. That's kind of the roots
Okay.
of of my marketing experience. And then, from there, I've had just a lot of great opportunities to work for some great software companies, and fleshed out my own marketing capabilities and skills to cover kind of the full marketing mix that is needed for, typically B2B software
Yeah,
companies.
yeah, that's great. You've had a really robust career, working in a lot of different types of firms, and I'm sure you've seen it all. So I'm curious, given the breadth of the work that you've done working across these range of different companies, I'm interested in getting your perspective on issues I'm sure will be of great interest to our viewers, both on the agency side and the marketer side. And I'm sure in many of your marketing roles in these organizations, demand generation has probably been one of the major constants across all of these firms. And, I'm sure you've seen it all. I'm curious, can you tell me a little bit about building a demand generation team internally and the advantages you see in doing that versus outsourcing that type of work for an agency and vice versa? What advantages do you see in using an agency over, doing it yourself?
You bet. So the answer is, of course, kind of a non-answer, which is it depends.
Sure.
But it depends on some pretty specific things. It depends on, um, the stage of the company,
Okay.
and is it time for the company to have an in-house demand generation team? It also depends on the nature of the industry, and
Okay.
how the buyers in that industry actually buy stuff, and what that means for the overall go-to-market plan.
Okay.
So, if sales is done one way, if it's highly relationship based, and it depends on industry associations and things like that. That might lead you down one path.
Okay.
Whereas if you've got a market that likes to buy online, and you have a product that is sort of self-serve, self-sign up, you would approach it differently.
Okay.
So it really depends on your go-to-market posture, the stage that you're in, and how people shop for and buy things, within the category that you're serving.
Okay. Wait, is it safe to say that uh, the later the stage of the organization, the further along they are in terms of the development, the more complex their needs are, and the more likely they may need to look outside, or is that an overgeneralization?
Um, it's not an overgeneralization. I would say that one of the biggest advantages of being a more, mature, established organization is that, you just have more institutional knowledge about how your market
Right.
works
Okay.
and how to approach it. And so that accumulation of knowledge is really a big determining factor. If you're at an early stage startup that has a great idea and an early product,
Hmm.
or one that's creating a category,
Right.
which is something that a lot of startups do, and a lot that I've worked for happen to do.
Hmm.
If you're creating that category, then you don't know. You have to learn. And
Right.
so in many of those cases, it can be a very, and also depending on your what your resource profile looks like, how
Sure.
much can you afford.
Right.
Sometimes it can be good to go to an agency for that
Yeah.
early stage
Right.
because they're going to have someone that specializes in email marketing. They're going to have someone that specializes in SEM,
Yeah.
and they're going to be kind of like a virtualized Swiss Army knife for you.
Mhm.
Whereas you might not be able to afford or know enough about what you need in the early stage to fully staff
Yeah.
that
Bring
effort.
all that talent in. Sure. I'm
Yeah,
sure.
so you can
Yeah. Go
kind
ahead.
of there's a little bit of there can be an approach of sort of rent before you buy.
Okay. Okay. Makes sense.
And that is a learning period, and oftentimes having that experience will teach you what you need to build internally on your team.
Okay. And again, maybe another overgeneralization, but would one say that the more complex sort of the sales process is, the number of channels that are involved, the better off you are looking outside for that level of expertise in an agency that, is very performance based?
Absolutely.
Okay.
If there may be a top rated, um, let's say, demand generation agency, or full service marketing
Hmm.
agency that uh, you know works miracles for their
Hmm.
clients. But if they have a particular specialization in a bunch of different areas that are not really that relevant to what you're doing, then that's something that needs to be explored and
Right.
vetted.
Right. Right.
Um, or you know, they may not be the end all be all agency that
Sure.
has all kinds of
Right.
awards,
Right.
but they may have a deep specialization with your type of buyer and in and around the
Yep.
categories that you're either operating in or creating.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Um, so
So,
the agency background, and then the other thing that I would say too is that an agency is kind of a blunt instrument, and in my experience, what really matters is the specific account team that you have,
oh, absolutely.
because all this comes down to people.
Yep.
And you may have a killer agency, but if the team within that agency, isn't on target
Yeah.
for what you need, then you might get results that are you know not what you want,
Yeah.
or not as good as you would like.
Yeah. Well,
So
that,
zeroing not just the agency, but the right account team within the agency, very important.
yeah. Yeah, and actually that leads to my next question. I'm sure, there are too many agency marketer relationships that don't last very long. Some of it might be driven by the fact that, the average tenure of a CMO is less than 3 years. But of course, some of it could simply be driven by the nature of the relationship between the agency and the marketer. Curious, what advice would you give to marketers and agencies on this topic? What should marketers and what should agencies be doing to establish really good partnerships, particularly as you think about the kinds of companies that you've been working for?
Yeah. So I've found it works best when you can kind of treat the agency as like an extension of your team. It sounds a little bit cliche,
No, it's
but build that. It's not just up to the agency to do a great job of building the relationship.
right.
It's also up to the client.
Absolutely.
And so, I have found that you could have an agency and one client might not put a lot into it and just expect the agency to be kind of a sort of a dispassionate service provider.
Right.
You know,
Yeah. Yeah. I kind of
deliver me.
refer to them as like a doer agency versus, a
Yeah, just send
thinking.
me the
Yeah.
deliverables, show me the results kind of
Right.
thing.
Right.
And if you're at arm's length like that, um, the result is not as good as if you are really rolling up your sleeves and working alongside the agency.
Yeah.
Even if they're, doing a lot of the implementation and executional work, you know, being with them in kind of forming the strategy,
Hmm.
tweaking the programs and methods, very important. And, very much so. You get out of it what you put into it.
Yeah, I'm curious. It's great advice. I'm curious. We talk with agencies all the time, and I've heard, some agencies complain about the fact that they don't have a seat at the strategy table with their client.
Mhm.
Any advice that you give to an agency that wants to try and find their way to that seat at the table, but their marketing client just really hasn't sort of given them that opportunity yet?
Yeah, I would say ask for it.
Okay.
Um, just be direct and ask for
Yeah.
it, and it depends on the marketer or the team that you're working with
Sure.
at the client.
Yep.
But it's usually a really healthy conversation to say, look, when we work at this level with our clients, we tend to get better results.
Yeah.
And let me show you an example of that. Here's some proof points of that.
Yep. Yep.
So, would you like better results? This this might be a good way to achieve that.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
can you please help us help you by letting us at least sit in? I think there might be somewhere sometimes especially if the agency or the partner that you're working with might be a bigger personality.
Hmm.
Maybe as a marketer you might be concerned that it might be disruptive having them in the room or in the
Sure.
conversation,
Sure.
with your
Yep.
stakeholders or whatever. So on the agency side, I think it's important to, if there is hesitation by the client, to make that feel safe for them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And,
Oh, that's a
to
good point.
say,
Yep.
look, let's just start off. I'll just be a fly on the wall.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. Yep.
And we'll take it from there.
Yeah.
I don't really have anything to contribute. We want to understand the dynamics
Right.
of
Yeah.
what is informing this strategy and approach
Yeah.
that you want to take on.
Which can only help the agency in bettering its deliverables to that client, even if they, aren't a contributor on the strategy level in meetings like that. So that's great advice. Yeah, I'm curious.
Context
Yeah,
is
go ahead.
helpful.
I'm sorry.
I was just going to say context for agencies just really helps with being able to serve their clients better, in my experience.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. So I'm curious, in your role working with startups, how do you typically go about defining messaging, positioning? How do you shape sort of that brand story? Are you using traditional methods typically for testing messaging platforms and positioning platforms, or are things determined, when you're working for a smaller startup in more of a subjective manner?
That is another thing that again depends,
Okay.
but I will say that it's really important, especially at the early stage, to know your buyer. Know who you're going for, know what they care about, know what alternatives and potential competitors might be in front of them, understand what media they're exposed to, what kind of marketing and selling channels
Hmm.
are they accustomed to. And it may not be just one type of buyer, there may be several kinds of buyers.
Right.
And so understanding who those are and what they care about is an important foundation for being able to speak to them and communicate with them in a way that's going to resonate.
Right. Right. Got it. Yep.
You got to know, you especially got to know sort of what problems they have, what alternatives they have available. All that is really key. And then, there are lots of different product marketing and messaging frameworks that are
Hmm.
out there. You can freely download. Um, but you find the one that works for you,
Right.
and then you kind of start to fill in the blanks.
Yeah.
You might need help, with some of the copywriting, and that's okay. But if you can at least put a stake in the ground to say, okay, this is my buyer, this is what they care about
Hmm.
relative to our product and our category, this is what we offer, this is why it's good, this is what it does, then you can start to map how you are messaging and positioning and communicating that product
Right.
to the buyer more effectively. And by the way, everything that I'm saying here, going through all these questions, this is very much from a B2B software perspective. And so I just,
Well,
for anyone who
it,
might be, checking this out, like I think it's important to differentiate, and there might be things that you do differently
well,
on
y-
B2C side.
yeah. I was actually just going to say, I mean, I think a lot of what you're talking about has application across industries, and too often marketers, jump into the exercise of launching products without sort of taking the time to think about some of the things you're talking about. So I'm curious, when is the best time for an agency to knock on the door of a startup firm? At what stage in its development, and why? And should the messaging an agency is using be different at different phases of a startup's development?
I think that agencies need to have a point of view on how they serve companies that are at different stages,
Okay.
right? And they may serve companies at multiple stages, and hopefully they're helping them move from one stage to the
Right.
next.
Right.
Those transition points are very important. And so, first of all, it's never too early. If you're on the earlier side, I, it's a lot of times on the earlier side, clients are going to be more resource constrained.
Sure.
So just go in knowing that,
Right.
and go in. I would say being a little bit more educational and relationship focused,
Okay. Good advice. Yeah.
and kind of helping to prepare them to be a buyer of your services
Okay.
at some point. So
Okay. That's a
and you never and if you do that, you don't really lose anything,
yeah.
right? It's not like you're gonna if someone has, a budget and a need for what you do, it's not like you're gonna miss that opportunity because
Hmm.
you're being educational and trying to establish a relationship.
Yeah.
If they've got the budget and the need and you come in saying, "Hey, I just wanted to get to know you a little bit. I know you guys are, early stage, but
Right.
probably growing really rapidly. You probably can't work with us at this point, maybe, I don't know,
Yeah.
but would love to find out more, tell you about what we do, and tell you about what we're seeing across our clients that might be helpful for where you're at right now."
Yeah.
And, I think curious client marketers will, for a healthy percentage of the time, take them up on that.
Right. Yeah. No, that's great advice. And I would imagine there are agencies out there that don't necessarily think that way. They either look at the startup and think, these guys have no money and I don't want to work with them, or don't want to dedicate the time, show the empathy, to that marketer at that early stage. So that's great advice.
The other thing that I would mention is, sometimes I've seen a pattern of people from agencies, you know, uh, keeping tabs on who's getting funded.
Hmm.
And then, when there's a funding announcement, you better believe you're going to get a ton of emails from agencies and other kinds of
I'm sure.
vendors. And so just know that, you know, even though that is an opportune time from a budget availability
Hmm.
perspective,
Hmm.
there's a lot more competition for
Yeah.
attention.
Okay. So you're saying if you can kind of find them before the funding, you may be in a better place, particularly if you're sort of giving something away, so to speak, to try and help that organization.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that it makes sense. Oh, they just got a bunch of money.
Yeah.
Okay, now they're in a position to buy from us.
Right. Right. Yeah.
That's not. I just want to caution that. Yes, that's true,
Yeah. No,
but it's not necessarily going to be super high
yeah.
yield.
Yeah. No,
Because
that's definitely
yeah,
good counsel. I know the
it's a lot
agencies.
of there's a lot of inbox competition around those
Yeah.
times.
Well, actually, this rolls nicely into the next question. I know technology, pharma, bioscience companies are just generally some of the hardest for agencies to penetrate. We represent a number of agencies on the agency new business side of our world that target these type of firms, and it's tough to break through. Any counsel you'd give to agencies to help them do a better job of connecting with folks like yourself? Any better platforms to use, approaches, messaging that you think would be effective?
Um, I would say that, well, first of all, I am just getting to know the life sciences industry
Hmm.
um, with this new role that for me just started
Hmm.
last month. But I would say, you know, life sciences is kind of a broad brush, and I think that the best agencies and service providers are going to look at what this, prospective client does within life sciences,
Yeah,
not just, hey, we're life sciences. That's kind of not enough specialization.
sure,
There
sure.
needs to be specific specialization in what
Okay,
in the part of the industry that client is focused, right?
okay.
So it might be biotech, or it might be it might be software,
Yeah,
or it might be drug discovery or something like that. But going beyond just that first level of industry
yeah,
specialization,
yeah.
I think is important.
Yeah, no, that's so true. I know, when some of our agency clients have targeted pharma companies don't just expect you to have pharma experience. They expect you to have, cardio pharma experience, or,
Yeah,
whatever
yeah,
it might be. And
yeah.
that's good. That's really good advice. That translating into the world of technology and life, just life sciences in general. So that's
Yep.
good to know. Um, yeah, I mean, as you think about like phone and email and LinkedIn and mail as, physical mail as a platform, is there, if I were an agency and you were trying to give me some counsel on how to best bust through to some new startup company, what would you suggest I do?
Again, it depends.
Yeah.
Um, but I'm always a fan of really like unique educational resources.
Okay.
And so that it might be, some kind of guide. Not, everyone does content marketing,
Sure.
but kind of going beyond that,
Yep.
beyond just beyond the case study, show me how you help companies like mine be successful, or show me some unique insights that you have because of your specialization and because of the success that you've been
Right.
able to achieve. Like,
Right.
what are you seeing across clients? I think that kind of stuff is really valuable. It might take the form of content. It might take the form of events. It might take the form of something else.
Right. Yeah,
But I think educating and being helpful is has got to be a big part of the
that's
approach.
great. And my last question is, any advice you'd give to marketers that are operating in spaces like yours, or companies like you've worked in the past, or just marketers in general for that matter? Any advice you give them, those thinking about bringing a new agency on board?
Yes. So one of the things that I think is so crucial, and I constantly have to remind myself of this. It sounds really obvious, but for some reason, sometimes it can be missed. Sometimes I've noticed that agencies can be very focused on activities,
Okay.
and showing, activity. Look at, okay, this is the activities that we did last week. This is the activities that we're doing front, forward in the coming week.
Hmm.
Um, w- a lot of times, it depends on the type of agency, but pretty much every time, um, I really care about results.
Right.
And those results need to be the results that I'm looking for need to be expressed in some very specific metrics. And there needs to be a conversation at the beginning of the conversation
Yep.
that says, these are the results that I'm trying to get.
Yeah.
This is how I'm going to measure if we're successful. How how accustomed are you
To
to, and
delivering those.
comfortable are you
Yeah.
with pursuing these metrics, and in some cases reporting on them, because you can do all the activity in the world, but if it doesn't, generate these kinds of results that I'm
Right.
looking for right here, a 30% increase in this or a 62% increase in that, um, then it's not going to work.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so getting that sort of what I would say uh, KPI alignment
Got it up front.
right up front,
Yeah.
and having that be in the foreground the whole time is very
Yeah.
important. And also, you might get a biz dev person on the agency side who is completely comfortable with that and is able to showcase results
Hmm.
where that
Hmm.
where that happened.
Right.
You got to make sure that gets carried all the way through that
Yeah.
account team,
Right. Right.
right?
Yeah. It's one thing for just a sales guy to be able to talk that story, but and
That's right.
understand it. But yeah, having the whole agency or at least your team that you're working with understand that is important.
Yeah, so I am very, if you ever talk to agencies that I've worked with before, they'll that's one thing that I just do very much,
Yeah.
and probably increasingly so as I get older. Is
Yeah.
just I'm all about the results,
Oh,
the
it's
activities. There's a limitless number of things that we can do and make ourselves busy with.
yeah. Right.
But
Exactly.
what we really want to do is achieve
Yeah.
success in some
Yep.
very specific ways
Yeah.
that are going to determine how we judge the value of what the agency is
Yeah.
doing.
That's great. That's great. Listen, Adam, it's been a fast half an hour. I really appreciate you making the time today and sharing your thoughts. I think some great perspective that's going to help not only marketers in and out of the categories that you've worked in, but also agencies. I think you've given us some great things to think about for agencies to think about on how they can not only win the hearts and minds of marketers like yourself, but better the relationships that they have with their existing clients. So appreciate the time and certainly wish you all the best and hope the rest of the day is a good one for you.
It's my pleasure, and I'm wishing everyone out there on both the client side and the agency side a great rest of the year and nothing
Absolutely.
but success.
That's great. Thanks so much, Adam.
All right, thank you.